What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video for the First Descendant today, we're looking at a build slash setup for Ajax. At the moment in the game right now, the only thing that I think really is worth grinding and spending a lot of time on is Sigma Sector, whether that is you fleshing out Descendants arc boards that you haven't done yet, or basically being on the lookout for mutant cells for whichever Descendants you enjoy playing. Now that being said, we know that Season 3 has been postponed all the way until August, so we have more than a month left to essentially grind this content, and therefore I'm re-gearing all of my Descendants to make them be able to do this as fast and as efficient as possible. And the next one on the block was Ajax. Now Ajax is traditionally considered as to be a tanky Descendant. I know that there aren't really archetypes or classes in the game per se. We don't really have dedicated healers, DPS and tanks and things like that, support, whatever. Although certain Descendants do certainly fit into that role if you were to kind of like play them that way. Ajax is definitely one of these Descendants. He very much has a toolkit that resembles something that you would see on a tank or a tank support, with some of his abilities essentially offering defensive options for you as well as your allies. But at the same time, you can also build him to be an absolute slaughterhouse when it comes to dealing AoE damage to a lot of enemies at the same time, which is of course what you find in Sigma Sector and 400% infiltrations. By capitalizing on his jumps and just basically stacking as much damage into that, you're able to pretty much one-tap all the enemies that aren't of a yellow bar variety, and the yellow bar enemies will die to 2 to 3 stomps or something like that, and you can put a couple of shots into them with the gun as well to make that go easier. So Ajax, while he is not necessarily, I would say, within the top 5 or possibly even in the top 10, I don't know, depending on your ranking system of AoE AoE mobbing Descendants, that he is still, in my opinion, a very fun option, since he plays so drastically different to, I would say, most of the other Descendants, because you kind of like just put House of Pain jump around on, and you just Super Mario Hulk smash, Hulk jump fucking everybody to death, while you kind of like never ever get close to dying, because he is such a chunky bastard. So in this build, we're going to be specifically focusing on mobbing based content. I would not consider Ajax to be a super strong option in terms of like going and fighting void intercept bosses and stuff like that. He's absolutely an option that you can take if you want to run with your friends and you want to give them some survivability options and stuff like that. And of course, there's weapon choices that you can make then that can offer further utility to your team. But this build will purely focus on AoE mobbing, which he does surprisingly well. Let's jump into the build. Alrighty, so first things first, starting us off with Descendant Modules, we will be focusing on using Void Charge as our Transcendent mod of choice. Basically, you could go with Void Charge. I think there's an argument to be made for Void Explosion as well. The build is kind of like very similar. The reason why I ended up settling on Void Charge is because you do get the additional damage that you get from stacking defense. It's not a massive amount, but it is decent enough to kind of like make Void Charge the preferred Transcendent mod for me to use. And that also being said, that it allows you to double stack Void Charge, which is your second ability, which is the more fun one to use. It's the bunny hopping, like sort of jump Super Mario ability. So I'd rather want 2 of those than 2 of his third ability, which is Expulsion. But pretty much the build is this: you hardly, especially if you're playing solo, you hardly ever use 1, you hardly ever use your 4. You're basically just jumping on everything, as you saw in the footage at the beginning of the video. And then as soon as stuff overwhelms you so much that you can't necessarily jump out of the pack, or there's a bunch of enemies that spawn immediately after you land from a jump, it makes sense to use Expulsion, which essentially allows you to almost like double tap your explosion. So you land with your second ability, and then when you hit 3 you get your another explosion, so it's like boom boom. So yeah, deals a whole bunch of damage and is pretty damn sweet. Now Ajax is a non-attribute Descendant, and then these 2 abilities unfortunately are 2 different abilities from an archetype perspective, right? So your second ability is a tech ability, and your third ability is a dimension ability. But the star of the build is our second ability, so we are going to focus into tech damage. Unfortunately, there's no way for us to do non-attribute tech and dimension, which would be pretty wild if they were to open that up at some point, but I don't necessarily foresee that happening, but that means that we're going to be focusing into non-attribute and tech. Now, for me, there's a couple of things which I want from this build. First of all, I want the explosions from both my second and my third ability to be big. I want them to be available on demand as much as possible, so essentially I can keep bunny hopping until I run out of resources. And then of course I also want those abilities to deal as much damage as possible. So those are the three sort of like tenets that hold up the build. We want damage, we want cooldown reduction, and we want massive explosions. So we want radius, right? We want range. So bearing that in mind, let's go ahead and focus first on our cooldown mods, right? So mods that help us with cooldown. So starting us off, we have MP conversion, which gives us a massive amount of skill cooldown. It does reduce our max MP a little bit, but that's not too much of an issue. We have these two focus mods. So we have focus on tech, which is our second ability's damage archetype, and we have focus on non-attribute, which is our overall governing damage type, right? So this gives us tech skill power modifier as well as some skill cooldown, and this gives us non-attribute skill power just non-attribute skill power, not modifier, and some skill cooldown as well. Then we also snap in Nimble Fingers, which gives us another small amount of, well, 25% is not necessarily small, but another amount of skill cooldown, and that essentially is our 4 mods that specifically focus on that. Next, we have the 2 amplification mods. Now, we're not going to focus on critical hit rate and critical hit damage because by default, Ajax's default critical hit rate is 5% before you start stacking stuff on it. So in terms of what you see with other Descendants having far higher base values when they start out, and base means the efficiency that, or rather how much it means for you when you start stacking into it. It's far easier to stack a base of 20% with a few mods than it is to stack a base of 5%. It doesn't necessarily make sense for me to build Ajax into crit hit and crit hit damage. That being said, with things like the Arche Tuning board and stuff like that, it's not that it's an impossible option. It's not that it's not something that you could do at all. It's just simply the decision that I made for this particular build right here. So the 2 amplification mods, what they do is, again, they give us tech skill power modifier as well as non-attribute skill power modifier, but what they do is they completely tank our skill critical hit damage and our skill critical hit rate, which is in any case means that we cannot build towards those anymore. Now at this point in time, there's a couple of slots open to us. We definitely want to do some skill expansion here, which gives us some skill effect range. And then because of what we have potentially from our reactor as well as from our arc tuning board, we don't have to use, so generally speaking, what you would go for here is you would go for something like maximize range, which gives you another 94% of skill effect range, but does slightly reduce our skill power modifier by 20%. However, we don't need to do that, so we only need to add in amplification control, which gives us skill effect range of 51%, which is less than maximize range. It does give us a little bit of max shield as well, which is not really necessary per se, but the point is we don't lose that 20% of skill power modifier, which I don't want to lose. That nonetheless still means that we are range capped with all of our skills, which is pretty much what we want. We want those explosions to be as big as possible. That leaves 2 mods which you haven't discussed yet. The first one is Spear and Shield. So you'll notice that I don't have an HP mod in here at all. And that's because we have external components now that can be modded, which can be modded with HP as well as defense. So we get a lot of survivability from that. And then the point is that we're going to be stacking so much defense because we do get some additional damage from it. You can see here that we get 17.3% of our damage, which is added to us. Remember, there are diminishing returns in play here, of course, so it's not that you can stack your defense to like 400k or something like that and it will infinitely, stack your damage. There is a cutoff point and there are diminishing returns for this, unfortunately, but that being said, it does still benefit us to stack our defense because it will actually affect our damage by quite a bit. The damage effect, the additional on our third ability is far less. So on our second it's 17.3%, on our third ability it's only 3%, but still, hey, I'll take 3% over 0% any day. So Spear and Shield will give us some more defense, but it will also give us skill power. And then for my last slot, I went in for something like increased defense, which just kind of like pushes our defense to the roof. Now, in many ways, this is overkill. Again, like I said, the diminishing returns that we see both from a defensive capability as well as the damage add does not necessitate for us to have to stack defense this high. But I do also kind of like feel like it plays into the identity of Ajax to kind of like just be this walking fucking brick shithouse. That being said, I can highly recommend something like multi-talented here instead of increased defense. If you don't necessarily care to play into the identity or whatever the fuck, and you just want to actually put in something that has some dual utility, due to the fact that one of our abilities is a tech ability and one of our abilities is a dimension ability, it means that you actually see quite a bit of use out of multi-talented. It means that when you use a dimension skill, your skill cooldown goes down by a further amount. Now, this is also overkill because our skill cooldown is crushed so much already, as you'll see just now when I hover over the abilities again. But the point is, you can pretty much give yourself an instant ability back. And then also, when you're using a tech active skill, your skill effect range as well as power modifier increases by 15%. Again, our skill effect range is already capped, so yes, the only thing that we really get from that is power modifier plus 15%. But hey, so if you're not interested in increased defense, definitely slap multi-talented in there. It does give you some additional damage as well. That being said, our two abilities then, you'll see that our second ability, our jump ability, which has 2 stacks, is all the way down from 12 seconds to 1.6 seconds in terms of skill cooldown, which means it's pretty much available all the time. You'll see it has a 3-second stun, and then you'll see that the damage range is capped out at 18 meters, which is pretty damn big, and it kind of like hits a big area around you. You can see our third ability goes all the way down from 10 seconds to 1.3 seconds. It is also range capped at 12% radius for the damage range, and then you can see that when the skill is enhanced, which of course you can use your skills, and then you get your enhanced skill after a couple of casts of your other skills, which then increases the radius all the way up to 18 meters, which is the same as our second ability. But nonetheless, we are range capped here, and we can see that we have a massive reduction on our cooldowns, which means both of these two abilities are pretty much available, on demand, which is what we want for this, because that's all we're doing is we're jumping, exploding, jumping, exploding, jumping, exploding. But yes, those are all the mods. Now, when it comes to your weapon of choice, really the only thing that makes sense to use it if you want to make your damage the star of the build and you want to deal as big as possible explosions is obviously Secret Garden. And that's because Secret Garden, it powers all tech abilities to deal more damage. So your second ability is a tech ability, so this will mean that your Secret Garden, just by holding it in your hands without any mods on it, it will deal a decent amount of additional damage, which is really good, and actually makes those explosions just super juicy. Now, you can actually build your Secret Garden if you want to. I showed this same setup off yesterday with Freyna, and that is if you want the weapon to actually deal some damage when you shoot with it. You'll see, or you would have seen in the footage, that I do actually use it sometimes to pick off enemies that are a little bit further away that I don't necessarily want to jump to. This is a very powerful build for the Secret Garden. That means that it actually deals a lot of damage just by shooting it. So it's not just a stat stick. It has like 70% critical hit rate with 100% critical hit damage, so it hits really fucking hard. I'm going to leave this open just for a little while longer so you can copy the mods if you want. But again, like I said, if you just want it as a stat stick and you just wanted to empower your abilities, then you can absolutely do that, because that is what Secret Garden does. It makes your tech abilities hit harder, so that's all good. Then, when it comes to Reactor and external components, the main point here is that, again, we are dealing with two different abilities, Tech and Dimension. But Tech is our star, if I could put it that way. So, one more thing, quickly, let me go back, right? Another weapon that I can absolutely recommend in the case of you wanting to just double down on the whole AoE, so you want to jump, pop off a few shots, jump, pop off a few shots, I can absolutely recommend Malevolent. I use this on every single Descendant because it's an awesome AoE weapon. And so therefore, when you're going into stuff like Sigma Sector, even with a Descendant that is not necessarily good at dealing AoE damage, this weapon makes the Descendant good at dealing AoE damage. So this is the build that I use for that. It has a toxic element priority there. So if you want to put in another element, of course you can do that. But this is again the same thing that I was showing off in the Freyna video from yesterday. But that's also a good option as well. Sorry, so then getting back to our Reactor and everything like that, the point is that we want to be getting ourselves a non-attribute tech reactor. So that's materialized mechanics. And then, of course, make sure that you have the right optimization conditions. I made the faux pas yesterday of saying that Secret Garden was not a tactical rifle, but a scout rifle. So allow me the opportunity to correct that now. So make sure if you're carrying the Secret Garden that you are optimized for a tactical rifle, and then of course make sure that if you are carrying Malevolent that you are optimized for a hand cannon. Otherwise, you sacrifice like 60% of skill power, which is, you know, a dumb move. So let's not do that. Now, when it comes to the substats, you'll see that I haven't even enhanced this reactor all the way. I am on the hunt for a reactor that has a tech skill power boost on it, and then something like skill effect range or skill cooldown, either one of those two. Most likely skill effect range is what I want on there. I have yet to find that, so for now I'm using skill cooldown and skill effect range on this. Of course, you can just fully go into damage, everything like that. It's just for this particular setup, what I want is I want the maximum amount of range, I want the maximum amount of cooldown, and this reactor allows me, or helps me at least, to get to that. But you can absolutely go into defensive, into damage substats as well. But if you recall from the footage that you saw at the beginning of the video, it's not like we could one-tap the normal enemies harder. They fucking die from one explosion, and then of course we're dealing a fair bit of damage to the yellow bars as well. So, you know, it is what it is. Then in terms of external components, I gotta go with Slayer on this one. The 26.1% skill power increase is just too good not to use it. It's kind of like Slayer's my de facto set that I use on all skill-based Descendants unless I have a specific reason to dive into a different element or something like that. Like in the case of Freyna, where you go for, you know, Plague or something like that. It's not to say that you can't accomplish sexy things by combining, like for example, 2 pieces of Plague, which gives you some tech damage, and then 2 pieces of something else, or so on. I think Slayer is just the most straightforward setup, where you put the 4 pieces of Slayer in, and then you get the 26.1% skill power, and you know, that's it. Yes, you get additional rounds to magazine. Yes, your skills cost 15% more, so there are some deficits to this as well as some other, like I said, possible positive things like more general rounds capacity and rounds per magazine, but that shit doesn't really matter. The reason why you take this is for the skill power plus 26.1. Now, in terms of your mods that you want on there, of course you want max HP and you want defense. You want that on all 4. So you'll see here, these are scuffed rolls. They're not fantastic rolls at all, but basically I just made sure that I had 4 max HPs and 4 defenses, and then you're good to go. As for the substats on your Slayer set, what you want on your auxiliary power is MP recovery out of combat and max HP. What you want on your sensor is max HP and MP recovery in combat. And then what you want on your memory is defense and MP recovery modifier. This modifier affects both your recovery in and out of combat, so it's just a really good substat to have. And then last but not least, on your Slayer processor, you know, you have max shield and max shield regeneration here, or max shield toxin resistance, whatever. Generally speaking, your processor kind of like doesn't matter. So it is what it is. But all of this together then means that I end up with not that great an HP stat, like basically just under 8,000, and with about 1,700 in shield. But we have like almost 150k of defense. Now again, please be sure to know that there are diminishing returns for defense. But the bottom line is there's a noticeable difference in terms of how much damage you take if you stack your defense. And remember that this affects both your shield as well as your health. So it means that your shield takes less damage before it's depleted with a high defense stat as well as your HP. So by having this all together here, as well as some things that I'll show you in the inversion reinforcements, you are pretty much, I would say, unkillable. Like, you're gonna have to like stand in fucking enemy fire for like a bunch of seconds, not doing anything for you to die, and that's kind of like true for any Descendant to a degree. So, you know, it is what it is. But yes, with this combination of, you know, stats and setup and everything like that, we end up with this monstrous defense stat. So at the very least, that's impressive from a fucking numbers perspective, I would say. Then with our Arche Tuning board, of course, what you want to do, and I should probably just call this mobbing, right? Fucking hell, bro. There's a professional outfit over here. So over here, you're gonna go again. What I would say is almost like, in a way, a semi-cookie cutter setup for like skill-based Descendants. The only difference here being that we don't go near skill duration or anything like that. But you do want to cut across here. I pick up additional skill power, just boop, boop, up and down like that. It's little nodes, but hey, it don't matter. We go around here, we get ourselves some skill cost. We go around here, we get ourselves some range. We get the yellow node here, or golden node if you're that guy. And then we continue on going up here, getting MP, all that stuff, to get our skill cooldown node up here. And then last but not least, we peel all the way up here where we can get ourselves a mutant cell well. And non-attribute cohesion is the one that we want. This says it has a 50% trigger rate with a 10-second duration. There's 3 stacks that can come out of this, and because you're killing massive amounts of enemies at the same time, you will, generally speaking, as long as you're in a fight with enemies, you'll always have 3 stacks of this, and that's just a nice almost 20% additional non-attribute skill power, which is obviously super, super handy to have. Last but not least, I believe we should be talking about inversion reinforcement. And in inversion reinforcement, again, if you are running around with Malevolent, consider picking up evolutionary cutting mechanism just for those 2 extra cogs. I mean, why the fuck not? Otherwise, if you are just running Secret Garden, go for Adrenaline Rush. It gives you more movement speed when you defeat enemies. That's good shit. By picking stuff up here, you get yourself Quantum Domain, which gives you more range, which we're already capped, but it also gives you more skill power. This goes up to 15 stacks. So the first 15 times you use an ability, it will get to its 15 stacks, and then essentially for the rest of that activity's duration, you have those 15 stacks, so you get the benefit of that. Biodensity augmentation is good for us here because, yes, we have a fairly low HP stat, so this can give you a little bit more survivability if so required, because what this does is, again, as long as you defeat enemies, you get additional max HP plus 11.7%, and this is for 30 seconds, and it's up to 5 stacks, so essentially more than 50% of additional max HP, which can just give you even more survivability. And that, coupled with crisis response system, which also gives you more defense, also on 5 stacks, it's just, you know, survivability to the max. Last but not least, consider using Arc Circulation Tactic, which gives us skill to cooldown minus 24% for some reason, even more skill cooldown, which means that essentially you will never have to wait for your second ability. It is available as long as you have resources, and as long as you have a fucking finger that can hit that button, you will have that ability available for you to use. And that, my peeps, is that. A build for Ajax that is deceptively good at doing a AoE-based content, things like Sigma Sector. I had a fun time leveling up some weapons, just running this and finishing off the last couple of, arc levels and everything like that once I settled into exactly how I wanted this build to flow. And, of course, I will have more of these coming with, additional characters, coming down the line later in the week. So please let me know in the comments down below. You guys have been dropping comments on the Freyno video telling me which descendants you're looking for. I'm adding them all to the list, and eventually I will cover all of them, of course, but go ahead and let me know which descendants you would like me to prioritize, just like you did with the Freyno one. If you are an Ajax enjoyer, I hope you enjoy this build. Thank you very much for all the support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video. As always, fucking cheers.